We just got to finish off a little bit here from about 180 to 195 or so, because we got to talk about, because there's some weird things that he says towards the end here. Has nothing to do with man. In it there begins the history, encounter, and decision between himself, this is God's self, and man. For the fulfillment of the election involves the affirmation of the existence of elected man and its counterpart in man's election, in which God's election evokes and awakens faith and meets and answers that faith as human decision. So there we have it. There's not only room for man's faith and man's decision and man's action. That is required, but it is ultimately the second of two voices. There's the call and there's the election of man. And the absence of the faith and the response and the obedience of man does not dissolve the voice of God that has gone out into all creation in Jesus Christ from, like he says, pretemporal eternity. We cannot assert too strongly that in the election of grace it is a matter of the decision and initiative of the divine good pleasure. That as the one who elects, God has absolute precedence over the one who is elected. Do we have freedom in the matter? That's a real good question. We don't have freedom in the matter that God has been first. We just weren't on the scene. We were not on the scene. He gets to go first. And all we get to wonder about is why the God who went first decided to love us so much. That is the question which we have to wrestle with. On man's side, this election becomes actual in man's own electing of God, by which he is made free to do the will of God, and achieves and possesses individuality and autonomy before God. That is our response. And on man's side, the election becomes actual at that point. Now, this is the sticky point. So it's not actual for those who maybe haven't heard the message, haven't responded in faith. Actual. What does he mean? Then he goes on and deals with, I think it's, no, that's at the very end. 186. He says, yes, this election takes place and it is real and effective. It takes place in the calling, justification, sanctification, and glorification of man. It takes place in the foundation and existence and guidance of Israel and the church. It takes place in our awakening to faith and hope and love. This is page 186. But predestination also takes place, even where we do not recognize it directly, even where we do not understand it, even where, knowing of it and having directly recognized and understood it in the history of salvation, we can only confess it as a hidden reality in world events as a whole. In principle, it is never concealed. That's the question. That is the question. How does that work itself out? When we look to people of other faiths, when I look to people outside of Israel in the history of humanity, where Jesus was never known and today is not known. He goes on to interact, I think this is his brother, Peter Barth, put a paper in, and he really comes to the defense of his brother. I like it, saying that he had it right. He couldn't really defend himself, maybe as I think it was 1936. He put this paper in the Calvin conference, asserting that the freedom of election, that it's not a fixed static, but it's dynamic. And Barth agrees with Peter Barth. I think it might be his brother. There's a really good summary of where he is up to this point on page 192, bottom half of 192. And that's where we're at right now. And we're moving on to the election of the community, Israel and the church. And that took a lot longer. That's probably like 35 minutes to talk about that. Sorry about that.